Indonesia, Australia's northern neighbour, is a nation comprised of over 17,500 islands, with a population of approximately 260 million people. The geography of these islands is as varied as the cultural practices of their inhabitants. So how did Indonesia become one of the world's most populous Islamic nations? The answer is trade. Indonesia's global position and historically strong trade relations with the Islamic Caliphate in the Middle East, as well as an Islamic presence in nearby Malaysia, led to a growth of Islam in the region, with Muslim gravestones found in Aceh dating back to the year 1297. From Aceh, Islam spread through Sumatra and Java during the 15th and 16th centuries, superseding Hinduism and Buddhism as the dominant religions in the region. Pockets of Buddhists, Hindus, and Christians remain today, particularly on the island of Bali and in West Papua. Because the introduction of Islam was largely peaceful, Indonesians absorbed the religion and melded many Islamic rituals and traditions with their own, resulting in an acculturated Islam. In 1945, occupying Japan established a committee comprised of nationalists and Islamic leaders to draft a constitution and prepare for Indonesia's independence. Arguments ensued about the role of Islam in the constitution. Nationalists wanted a nation founded on the high ideals of Islam, while Islamic groups pushed for an Islamic state and a government that implemented Islamic law. A compromise was reached in the form of the Jakarta Charter, 7 words included in the original preamble that made Sharia obligatory for all Muslim citizens. Further, the draft constitution stated that the president must be Muslim. However, the eastern non-Muslim islands threatened to separate from the Indonesian Republic due to these conditions. So on the 18th of August 1945, the Jakarta Charter and all references to Islam as the official religion of the state were removed. In the following decades, the constitution has been amended several times, largely due to political struggles and a push for Islam to be recognised as the state religion. Assemblies held between 1999 and 2002 sought constitutional amendment to reflect a more democratic and just Indonesia. Islamic groups pushed for the amendment of Article 29 to include the Jakarta Charter, making Sharia obligatory for Muslims and justifying the introduction of Sharia into the Indonesian legal system. However, the amendment was rejected, with opposing groups citing the need for unity and equality under the law and freedom of religion for all Indonesians. With the development of the constitution and independence came the development of a formalised Indonesian legal system. The Indonesian legal system is a combination of 3 components: Indonesian customary law, the Dutch civil law of the colonisers, and post-colonial national law, created by the Indonesian government post-independence. A formalised judicial system enforces the Indonesian legal system, utilising 2 supreme-level courts. Firstly, the Constitutional Court, and secondly, the Supreme Court, which provides advice to the state and supervises the 4 judiciary jurisdictions. An interesting observation is that the religious courts, run by the Religious Judicature, deal with the largest number of cases nationwide, more than all of the general judicature courts combined, despite its incredibly strict jurisdiction. The religious courts may only hear cases solely involving Muslims and only regarding the private areas of marriage, inheritance, Muslim wills, and Sharia economy issues. Despite their name, the religious courts actually rarely consider primary sources of Islamic law, and are only entitled to do so where the national legislation directs them to. Even then, they cannot make religious rulings that will contradict Indonesian national law, and for the most part, their judgments look identical to that of a secular court. The religious courts are arguably the most important in Indonesia, as in practice, these are the courts that the majority of the Indonesian population is choosing to interact with, and therefore the courts that have the largest influence on the Indonesian people's satisfaction with the judicial system. Overall, the religious courts are considered the most functional, corruption-free, and progressive courts in the system, with an appeal rate of less than 1%, compared to 34% in civil cases. The religious courts have also been commended internationally for increasing access to the legal system for the poor by waiving court fees for those genuinely unable to pay them. The province of Aceh is a notable exception, where the religious courts have been adapted into Sharia courts, which enforce the Aceh-specific Islamic law, a much stricter and more extreme Islamic law than the rest of the nation. Overall, whilst the religious courts are an important and influential part of the judicial system, their Islamicness is somewhat questionable and, in any case, very limited in its jurisdiction. But how does this system protect the human rights of the Indonesian people? To answer this, let's look at 3 areas: the rights of women, freedom of religion, and the compliance of Indonesian criminal laws with human rights standards. Human rights entail gender equality. The rights of women in Indonesia seem to be legally protected. For example, there are laws to protect their interest in marriage. Laws stipulate that marriages are to be monogamous. However, Muslim men in Indonesia can still have more than one wife, by a religious court approval and formal consent from his first wife. The legal measures are failing to translate to practice, as men often resort to private marriages, which bypass the courts, or provide false information to obtain court approvals. Also, the wife's consent can be given under pressure, or their refusal is outrightly denied. The estimated frequency of polygamous marriages is at 5% of the 260 million population. Polygamy is considered a serious violation of women's human rights. Further, since Indonesia's decentralization, there has been increased policing of women's behaviour, such as prohibitions from having eye-catching appearances or straddling motorcycles, allowing for discrimination in public places. Not only are the rights of women questionable, but the right to freedom of religion and Indonesian criminal law are issues of contention also. Freedom of religion is recognised in Article 22 of the Indonesian Law of Human Rights and Article 29 of the 1945 Constitution. However, this is not a true freedom. Citizens may not have no religion, and Muslims are not permitted to convert to other religions. The prevailing criminal law in the country is secular, except for the province of Aceh, which implements Sharia criminal law. By international standards, Sharia hudud punishments, such as flogging for alcohol consumption, adultery, or homosexuality, are regarded as inhumane, dreadful, and out of line with universal human rights. Although it's important to note that there is wide support for Sharia law from the very conservative Muslim population in Aceh. Overall, Indonesia has failed to translate their theoretical support for human rights into meaningful actions. As we've covered in our short snapshot of Indonesia, the country is home to a rich and diverse Muslim population, Islamic and legal practices. Only time will tell how the practice of Islam develops in the region.